Hello and welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital mediator Warren Frey. On May 5th and 6th, I was in Whistler, BC at the Vancouver Regional Construction Association's Construction Leadership Forum, and I interviewed several people from two sets of panels. The first panel, titled VRCA Legends, featured Maxwell Floors President Rick Wagner, Fraser River Pilot and Dredge President Sarah Clark, and EllisDon Senior Vice President for Western Canada David McFarlane. They discussed lessons they've learned as they progressed through their careers and what they wish they had known when they started. I spoke first to Rick Wagner, which you'll hear momentarily, followed by Clark and McFarlane. You were just in the VRCA Legends panel, where you kind of went over more or less life lessons that you've learned recently and in the past as a member of VRCA and otherwise. I'd like to start with what you said about you come from a family business, but you said people assume that just means you just get the job, and that didn't work out that way for you, and you kind of learned some lessons from that. So maybe start with that.
Yeah, I think the biggest part is you believe being a family member that you're immediately part of the team. Mm-hmm. And yet you recognize, or you haven't recognized at a young age, I sure didn't recognize that I needed to earn my place. It wasn't just taken for granted. And that took a lot of time. And it took a lot of energy to learn about other people, because I was very self-centered and you wanted to grow from that. But I had individuals within my family's team that took the time to explain that to me, and that really helped a lot. And I still reflect on what I did wrong back in those days when I'm going in to interview people today.
Okay.
So
which means you've learned from stuff.
Absolutely.
And so that kind of became, I wouldn't say it was a general theme, but it was definitely remarked by other people on the panel. And at the risk of two Gen Xers complaining about the people who have coming after us, Dave McFarlane from EllisDon said that he found that the younger generation, but some employees felt like they should just get everything right away, and that's not how this industry works.
No, that's correct. And I can say I'm very fortunate to, my wife is a teacher, and I have three kids that are 26, 24, and 22. So they're my litmus test. I'll say, Luke, what are you doing? Luke is my youngest at 22, still in university, or he's just finished writing his last exams now. And the way I want to approach things and the way he says I need to approach things are very differently. I mean, we're looking at some that are all tied up in their phones, instant gratification, not wanting to take the time to learn, meaning they want to move up the ladder very quickly. So I think there's different ways to build resilience, and we have to recognize that from the young ones. I think it's our job to teach them and help them grow their resilience. It's changing times, and it's not going to get easier right now. There's talk of recession. Young individuals have rent to pay. They probably want to stay in Vancouver, and so they have a lot of other things on their mind other than work, and we have to help them with that. We have to collaborate and listen to them. I think the biggest part is to listen and instill some hope in them.
And Sarah Clark, one of the other members of the VRCA Legends panel, she said, take what's thrown at you and run with it, because that's something she did when she went to Malaysia when she just started out. And so maybe that you could remark on that.
Yeah, and that was a good piece. I mean, embracing the here and now. I think over time I've learned that this too shall pass. But it may be uncomfortable. It may be I'm working in the office and I'm a new estimator and we have a new program that's coming in. And we all understand change is not easy, and not a lot of people want to change. They would rather leave. Some would rather leave than change, and they're going to leave for more money. They don't want to leave. If you have a culture that is right, and recognize the leadership that every individual has to offer, you can really grow yourself. And I think that's part of the learning is learn what the other individuals have to offer, and then teach what you learned from them as well.
You were all asked how you dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic and all the crazy changing conditions, including current ones with the war in Ukraine, which affects your business. Which, you wouldn't think flooring and the war in Ukraine, but it does actually affect your business.
That it does. I have to say, I did not do this alone. I have a great partner in my business, Stuart, and I have a great team in Maxwell Floors, and they talk. It's not easy, but You're gonna have somebody that's strong in the HR department, and have a team that can come and talk to you and say, Rick, we disagree with you. That's when I need to listen. With COVID-19, it was a big unknown, obviously, for all of us. Nobody really knew what was going on. I mean, we had a great person, Bonnie Henry, instilled a lot of hope. We care and all of that. And I think for us, it was the council. So within the construction industry, I had the fortunate thing of being able to keep my ear to the railway track and hear what was happening back in the east. And if they were going to close down, we did not want that to happen out here. So we needed to get better, faster, and across, pick up the phone, call our other trade contractors that are on site, say, how can we make this work? Maybe the project's going to be a little slower, or maybe we need to do double shifts so we're not losing all of this time if we have half the people on site. Anyways, COVID has brought our team closer together, but we're still learning from it. We're struggling with having everybody back to the office. Thought it was the right thing to do.
We've all had to concentrate on site safety always, but then you also had this whole thing of now we have to worry about office safety, which is not something you had to worry about prior to 2020.
Correct. And I think office safety can be looked at two different ways. One, we can look at it from the physical well-being of the disease, of COVID, but I think we also look at office safety as being a safe place for people to bring up what they're struggling with, whether they're struggling with their own mental health. And I can't come in today because I've got some anxiety going on, and we need to really listen to them. So it's not just the safety of COVID itself, but what that has given us. I mean, I'd like to say it's a gift, but it's a pretty lousy gift to get. But the gift it's given us is the learning to listen. It's really brought mental health forward, and that will do this industry well. That's something we did not address very well. We recognize it now when we're moving forward. We can't shame ourselves. We just have to be better. And this all's got to come around community and collaboration. I mean, we're as humans, we collaborate. That's what makes us stronger. We can't do this alone.
Hi, I'm Sarah Clark. I'm the President and CEO of Fraser River Pile and Dredge.
Hi, I'm David McFarlane, Senior Vice President, Western Canada for EllisDon Corporation.
And the two of you and Rick Wagner were on the VRCA Legends panel, and you sort of
We're trying to change the name.
Sorry?
We're trying to change the name
Fair
of
enough.
Legends.
Fair enough. But part of that was sort of looking back at what you guys have learned and what people could learn now if they're just starting out. So let's start with that. You both mentioned things that you wish you'd known at the start and that you look at now. Like, for instance, patience was brought up as a very important virtue. So if you can check in.
Yeah, I think we have an exciting industry to be involved in. There's so much to learn as the projects are getting bigger and more complicated, etc. So the new people that are being welcomed into our industry or coming out of schools, etc., need to remain curious. They need to learn a lot, and the patience reference is tied into, do your job to the best of your ability, and then look for more. Like set up. Sarah talked about it during the panel about it's a two-way street in having a career inside construction, right? You have an obligation to your employer, and your employer has an obligation back to you to give you a rewarding career. One thing that I certainly talked about is the frustration of the new people coming in the industry going, what's next, when they haven't even gone through step 1, 2, and 3 before they get that understood, and then they move on.
I said a few things up there. I think another thing I wished I'd known more about when I entered construction is, it's a fantastic place. You are coming up with a product, you're working as a team, and anybody that likes to work in a team is a great environment. You get so close to people. But what I wasn't very good at the start was managing my emotions, because it can be very heated a lot, and you can take things very personally in it, and I wish that I'd had more help in managing that. And I had a lot of help. And passion, you got to balance passion with not sweating the small stuff or things that aren't as important. It's really hard at first to know what is important and what's not. And I think maybe that's, a lot of maybe newer people getting into the industry have a struggle with, like, you're spending millions, thousands a day, you've got crews standing there, you've got a client that's upset, and learning how to manage that and knowing that you can get through that, that's a big part of your early career.
I think that's a terrific point. We really didn't explore that to the degree you just talked about. Like, Yeah, like we've empowered these young people, to your point, thousands and thousands of dollars a day, tens of thousands of dollars a day. And if they dig in or stick to a point out of principle rather than looking at the big picture, I think that's a great reflection. We should have talked a little bit more about, right? Like, this industry is the most exciting, robust industry there is. We come together, we build a building or build a highway or build a whatever facility, we come together and we disband, we go away. When do you get to do something so exciting? And every day will be different, right?
And form the relationships that you form across those projects, right? They're your friends forever.
And Sarah, you mentioned, speaking of these things that are exciting, when you first started out, they said, you want to go to Malaysia? And you're like, yeah. And so basically what came out of that was, when somebody drops an opportunity in your lap, you take it. And also you tell them you want these opportunities.
Absolutely. And, you have to believe in yourself. You have to believe that you have you can figure things out, but that you have that support around you, and ask questions. People are too shy to ask questions and I'm looking stupid. But then you realize, how the hell would I even ever know? I just graduated. I've only been here for 5 years. And it continues to my career now. I've never been in marine construction. I get to ask tons of questions. And you learn to realize your questions are getting to, they get you to where you need to be. So
I like what Sarah said there. Being a little uncomfortable is not a bad place to be as you're navigating this industry, right? And I think that would probably be the highlight to our couple conversations here is be uncomfortable, but don't be afraid to ask questions, right?
Well, another thing,
there's no stupid questions, there's stupid answers.
Yeah. Another thing that made everybody uncomfortable, and you guys addressed this, was when COVID hit and nobody knew what to do. And so how did each of you in your firms and individually tackle that, just mentally speaking and in terms of safety?
Well, I talked a lot about that during the panel today. Like, it was an unknown. We were navigating something none of us have experienced in our lifetime. And there was a lot of fear. We woke up trying to be able to keep the market open and viable. We all came together, general contractors and major developers and subtrades, and just like, how are we going to keep our people safe and navigate this, right? Because any given day, the industry could have been shut down. And so we did a lot of advocacy work. Like, we forgot who the companies we represented. We came together as an industry, and I'm probably the most proud of that, navigating what we were able to do, because it was cut and go. There was tons of work being canceled, and they're going to shut down the market. It would have been catastrophic.
It was communication, whether it be across the industry or with your people. So we had meetings every morning. What were we going to do? How were we going to handle it in different case scenarios? We had many online town halls with our people to say, okay, this is what we know today. We don't know this. If this and we'd be very transparent about how we would manage different scenarios and keep people up to date. And a lot of people going to mental health really needed to lean on people, needed to talk. So just even being there to talk through it with people was huge during that time. People were scared.
They were scared, exactly. And we probably didn't always get it right, but I'll tell you, we did a pretty darn good job, trying to balance all that. The commercial side of it, the mental health side of it, and keeping our workers, frontline workers, safe.
I'll give a plug for Bonnie Henry, who probably had the hardest job and is still feeling the repercussions of that with respect to her safety now. Mm-hmm. But we just said we're going to follow what Bonnie said. What Bonnie says we're going to do. That was tremendously helpful to have that guidance.
That's a great plug for Bonnie, because you look, I was seeing across Canada, she was always like front edge.
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing.
And my final question would be, okay, your guys are apparently legends, even though you don't want to use the term. Yeah. What's next for two legends in the construction industry?
Go to work tomorrow?
Fair enough.
No, we'll take the weekend off.
Okay.
Up next, I have interviews with participants in the We're All in This Together Risk Mitigation, Transfer, and Management panel, starting with BC Construction Association Industry Standard Practices consultant Katy Fairley, and then another interview with University of British Columbia Project Services architect Jay Hiscox and Western Pacific Enterprises Vice President Derek Fettback.
Hi, I'm Katy Fairley. I'm with Fairley Strategies, but most importantly, the Industry Standard Practices Consultant with the BC Construction Association.
And that's where I'd like to start. As somebody who does standard practices and talks to a lot of different people about a lot of different projects, you see risk from more of like a 10,000 feet up kind of view, as opposed to the people you interviewed on the panel, who each had their own way of looking at things because of what they do. So what is your take on risk from that 10,000 foot view?
Yeah, I mean, I think it hit the nail on the head saying that everybody looks at it from a different perspective. I think risk to me overall means uncertainty. I will say, I spent time working with owners. I understand, their concerns with how they approach to delivering their projects, but I think ultimately that risk of delivering an asset, in which of course they're the owner of that asset, it lies with them. So that risk really should be flowing up, but what we're seeing so much, certainly the last couple of years and just generally kind of that risk being shoved down.
Okay, what are some examples of that? Not specific examples, but what are some ways in which it happens?
I think you have to turn to kind of the contract terms, and some of the panelists today pointed out kind of design risk, the unknown site conditions. So what's in the ground. I think you're seeing that shifted along. I think the challenges that we saw with COVID, with the supply chain issues, those are all, yes, folks might be in a stip some contracts, certainly the trade contractors, but to put it on them to manage all those unquantifiable, unimaginable risks, I think is bad practice. I think those are kind of those big elements. I think one of the other ones that came out that I view as very cut and dry was when the government brought in, the BC government brought in sick time, sick days. Very clearly in most contracts, if there's a change in the law, that is a legitimate change in the contract and in the contract price. But we didn't see that. We had a lot of, particularly trade contractors, coming forward and saying like, hey, this is costing me a lot of money. And like I said, I view that change in the law, that is nobody's fault except for the government. And again, like that risk should be flowing up to the owners.
Okay, one other thing you mentioned was that closing out or finishing a project, it seems like A, it never finishes, and B, it finishes at different times with different people. It's a problem, is what I'm saying here.
Yeah, so that was one of the reasons why the BC Construction Association, we just issued, a new guide on project closeout, and kind of looking at from a couple different areas, kind of contractually getting out of your project, and that including getting your holdback money, and then your lien obligations under the Lien Act, and then the next item, would be like, what are some best practice tips? And I think that the panelists today made some really good points about, the never-ending punch list. You get the owner that comes in there, and then you get the owner's, user or stakeholder groups. They come in. But I think at the end of that project, they've run through their profit, and that includes the consultants, and everybody's just getting tired. And it's trying to stay focused on the end game, and then also like looking to your contract so that you do follow what it says to do.
And one other remark you made, I'm going to let you make this remark, is you said collaboration is a problem. Maybe you could elaborate on exactly what you said about collaboration.
Yeah, I think I did say, and I've said it to other people before, is that I do view collaboration as the second C word. I'll leave it to your audience to imagine what the first one is. But no, I mean, I think it's a buzzword. It's being overused. Our industry has always been collaborative. There's always been multiple trade companies on site completing multiple scopes of work. There's general contractors. There's multiple consultants with their disciplines and expertise. So to say somehow that our industry needs to be collaborative states that it wasn't at some point, and it absolutely has been. So like I said, I mean, it's a buzzword. Some of it just means common sense. Having certain types of projects, you should be having your major trades involved. You should also be paying them for their time. Same thing, like having well-coordinated drawings is suddenly, integrated project or integrated design project process. So it's I don't like it because I don't think it's reflective of our industry. And really, at the end of the day, it's really just more best practices that should be done anyways.
Now, when I talked to other members of the panel, they said that this has gotten better. People are planning more at the beginning, and it's not like it was 10 years ago. Are there other areas has it gone up or down, or has it improved, or has it gotten worse, or does it really depend?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've really seen the rise of construction management. Most specifically, it used to be design, bid, build. You tender a project. Hopefully, you have something of a complete design, and the GC gives a stick price. And it was a defined scope for a set price. I think we have seen that. Construction management come in. There's IPD, progressive design build, kind of any of those other delivery methods are going to bring the expertise of your construction team members in, and you may have a better chance at getting collaboration out of it. But that's really been a big shift that we've seen.
I'm Jay Hiscox. I'm the Director of Project Services for UBC.
I'm Derek Fettback, Vice President with Western Canada.
And we just both got out of a Vancouver Regional Construction Association Construction Leadership Forum panel about risk mitigation. I'd like to start with what does risk mean both of you? Because Jay, you're sort of the owner side of things and you're more the GC sub side of things. Subtrade. So let's go with what risk means to an owner compared to a GC or subtrade.
Yeah, and I think owner, public sector owner in that sense,
Yeah,
right?
good point, yeah.
A lot of what we talk about is risk has these layers about the fact that we're doing projects in and around. UBC is a community of 90,000, right? Staff, student, and public. So risk is there's safety risk, financial risk, and we kind of have to deal with all of it. And it's interesting that risk for trades and GCs, it flows up to us. So we have to kind of extend what we see as our risk to the people we're trying to use as partners. Right? So the risk has got a few layers to it, but for us, the safety risk is a really big one because everything we do is in and around a very, very busy, active place. So like a lot of owners, that one rises up really high.
You compared it to healthcare. You kind of have to operate at that level, and it has to be open a lot, like healthcare does.
Yeah, and it colors. You're essentially inviting people to come in and play in a really sensitive area, right? So I think that's true in healthcare. That's true in like YVR, and when you're dealing with contractors in a secure airport area or something. We have it. It might be a lab environment or a student teaching environment next door, or students living there. One of our risks is students like climbing stuff. So construction sites are really fun for 20-year-olds who don't understand risk.
Wouldn't have predicted that, but
right. So just things you have to own, but things you have to extend as what our construction partners have to take on.
And from your point of view?
A lot of the same risks. The safety, which is a huge one, financial, contractual, design development, all of those. Safety being a huge one for our workers. We want to make sure everyone's going home safe. But that also plays into the design. As the design properly evolves, where we safe build methods and everything else.
Now, something that was pointed out was that collaboration is kind of when things have fallen apart. It was put less politely than that at the point, but basically, how do you guys feel about that? That when you need to start talking, that's when there's a problem. Or maybe I'm not saying that the right way.
No, collaboration is a huge part of this, and I was mentioning it up there, is zippering up your project managers, connect with the project managers across managers, the president, vice president, CEO. Everyone should have a counterpart that they're reaching out to across, and as any breakdowns are happening, by nature they will. Project managers are going to disagree on something that another level can step in to help resolve the issue and help everybody move past it amicably. If it left to fester, that's when you really see the breakdowns that will happen.
I'm just thinking the topic of the panel. I think collaboration is one of the things where people really, really miss it when it's not there. So you and when it's not there, you have to say, why isn't it here? People get into these sort of questioning diagrams. So we see it as like, you can't assume that everyone coming to the table will reach across the table to collaborate. You have to create the conditions for it. And I think it's interesting because one of the things we talked about on the panel, which I really resonate with, is getting people to be declarative about what reward is in a project. Risk is always married with reward. And so if all the stakeholders are declarative about that, it can create the conditions for collaboration on the terms that mean success for them. I think sometimes we see lack of collaboration pointed at. It's like, well, why are you asking a trade who has no stake in this issue to go and solve something that's not theirs? 9 times out of 10, I think you find that's the undercurrent when there's no collaboration.
And I know this has changed in, let's say, the last decade, where people get to the table before anything gets put in the ground. There's a lot more meeting ahead of time than there used to be.
Oh, absolutely. They said 5-10 years ago, rarely were we ever engaged early on when a project was still conceptual. And now, we're probably nearing half of our projects where we're coming in at a very early stage and having an involvement to help develop the design and steer the direction.
And just to leap at the end of the project, you pointed out that change orders are kind of the bugaboo here, that they're the thing where people get asked, why didn't these get fixed? Or it's where things get delayed.
Yeah. Change orders, yes, change directives are the big one. Change directives where we're being instructed to go do the work and we'll negotiate what that final cost is later. It's a huge problem in the industry. We're coming to the end and trying to settle for 50 cents on the dollar for work that's already been performed.
And honestly, people managing project budgets can't despise change directives more either. There's no joy in those. I call them a necessary evil. There's times in projects we need them, but when they take off, nobody wins. People trying to do budget control do not love change directives. But
quite honestly,
but the pre-construction thing you mentioned, it's interesting because it has changed in the market for sure, but you still see differences between where pre-construction activities are focused and targeted and have outcomes, whereas some people roll into pre-construction thinking that just by chatting you're going to get somewhere, and then are surprised that the project hasn't been influenced. It's like, well, you still need to bring the stakeholders together with a common purpose and some kind of outcome so people know what they're being asked to do. If you just come for a chat, that isn't necessarily pre-construction, that's chat.
Very clear requirements on what the end
here's
goal
what we're trying
is.
to do here.
Yeah.
And one thing the moderator, Katy Fairley, said is that closeout is the toughest part of construction. Like, it seems to never end. Some of you could address what the problems are there and where the risk is there.
Where the risk is there. I mean, what I've seen is closeout problems. A lot of times there's a contractual basis to the closeout problem. So again, it goes back to good form of engagement and good agreements and, all of that. But there is also a culture where there's a blur around when a project is done, because when the contract says it's done isn't necessarily when others think things are done, right? So you get into opinion fests, and opinion doesn't marry well with contracts.
Keeping everybody on the same page for the duration, clearly understand the requirements and where the end goal is that we're all heading.
I think for trades it does help. When they're trying to pull out, they're trying to get out what they put in, and they're at that stage. Just still saying so helps, because then it's clear that someone else's timeline may not have any pain to it, but the contractor might, the subtrade especially, might be sitting there, and they might be in so much pain. But if they're not even feeling the pain, they have to speak to have people know. I've been waiting for 3 months unpaid, and whatever it is. Great, okay, let's try and deal with it. That's hopefully where the collaboration can help.
You can hear the Construction Record podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Music, and Spotify, as well as the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce websites. Thanks for listening.